Hello, Atheist Edge. Kind of a big panel today. We've got a lot to get to, so we're going to start with we're going to do plugs right off the top. Plugs and just a little something about yourself. And we'll start with from left to right. We'll start with Courtney.
Hi. Hi. I'm Courtney. I'm president of a local atheist community group, Metroplex Atheists, and I also help out with Jim's channel. I guess it's kind of my channel too, Atheist Edge. I'll own that. And then I also do Women of Deconversion, which is the first Monday of every month. So that's this coming Monday. And it's just a bunch of women that get together on live chats and talk about different things. It's really, really fun. So yeah, that's me. My degree is in psychology, so whatever I talk about usually centers around that. And I'm happy to be here.
All right, Fair.
My name is Sabrina. I am known as Sabrina, Fair Whisper Goddess, Goddess of Edge. At the moment, Fairy Salt on liveme.com. I am a singer, musician. I make kind of horror/comedy videos. I host discussions and debates. I make social commentary. My channel is youtube.com/Fair Whisper Goddess. On Twitter, I'm /Fair Whisper. On Facebook, /Fair Whisper. I'm a mother of 2 special needs children. I have traveled the world throughout my life. My parents were missionaries. I'm an atheist, though I do have I consider myself to be spiritual, even though I don't believe in a God or gods. I don't know what else to tell you about myself.
Great. And now our guest of honor, Mark.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you all having me here tonight. I teach apologetics and philosophy at a small local Bible college, Tri-State Bible College. I live in the southeastern part of Ohio, which is near West Virginia and Kentucky. Have an interest in a lot of things. Used to play in a hair metal band back in the day, wore spandex, if you can picture that. Big Rush fan, love Rush. I like having conversations like this. Try not to get too full of myself, so if I do, you guys have every right to call me out on it. And just as a side note of interest for conversation, my hometown is Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the home of the Mothman. If you guys have heard of Mothman, who's kind of our local version of Bigfoot.
Local legend.
Yep, that's it. So here I am. I appreciate you guys having me and look forward to our conversation.
All right, Pastor Wilson.
Yeah, I'm Pastor Wilson with the True Body of Christ Restored. Our online church, the truebodyofchristrestored.com. It's designed to teach people why they're going to hell if they're not a member of our church, and to give people access to everything they'll need to actually learn the right way to follow Christ, because the church has been corrupted over the last 1,800 years. So if you want to learn more, you can visit our website at the truebodyofchristrestored.com, or you can listen to these type of debates on our YouTube channel.
Great.
That's it.
Suris.
How's it going, guys? I'm Suris. I have a YouTube channel with over 170 videos so far because I forgot what having a life was like about a year ago. But mostly I cover, sometimes I do counter apologetics. That's my LHAC series. Usually, though, I do video responses, and the entire point of my channel is try to minimize harm. So whenever I'm dealing with people, it's usually like some of the anti-vax crowd or like young Earth creationists. A lot of things that I deem harmful. So I'll usually go after a lot of that and try to point out. I'll also point out I've got a few videos talking about some arguments that people use for the Bible to say that it says one thing or it says another thing. Usually these people are using stuff like the King James Version. And usually when that's the case, I'll just go into the old Hebrew and Aramaic and show them what, original passages actually meant. So if you're interested in any of that silly stuff, go ahead and hop over there. It's pretty much all I do because, again, I forgot what having a life was like when I started doing daily videos.
Nice. Suris, what does LHAC stand for the people that don't know?
It's let's have a conversation. It's usually dealing with philosophy and just other topics that are more conversational bits. And
Mark, I won't hold it against you that you're a Rush fan. I know, I think all of them have PhDs in music. They're technically very accurate. They're really good musicians. I just never got into that music, though. I just could not. But I know I.
That's fair enough.
All right, and let's see. What do we have coming up, Courtney? Let's. We're planning a road trip to the American Atheist Convention in April. I think we're going to be.
February 9th. February 9th, we have Shelley Segal coming out to Jay Gilligan's in Arlington.
If you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Shelley Segal is a Australian folk singer, atheist, and we're having her back for a performance. That's right. February 9th, you said?
February 9th at 8 p.m.
Yeah. If you look up, go to the Atheist Edge Facebook, you'll see the event.
I'm not prepared.
And Faithless Forum is April 27th in Dallas. And I just finished a collaboration with Suris here about schisms in the atheist community. And if the Christians think that infighting, if they're the only ones that own infighting, no, you don't. So I air some of our internal dirty laundry in that one and how to fix it. And I recently just did a collaboration with Seth Andrews from The Thinking Atheist. It's a little cartoon on it's a rewrite of The Emperor's New Clothes, and that's on our channel, and pretty proud of that. And let's get right into it. Mark, the floor is yours.
Well, all right. Yeah, I've been through these sorts of conversations before. I also work at Marshall University with the Ratio Christi chapter there, and we have a couple regular atheists to show up, and they do like to discuss issues with morality. And usually these sorts of issues, they tend to come down to what some people would say grounding or that sort of thing. But I would like to throw a question out there just to kind of avoid some of these discussions that get repetitive over time. And I'd kind of like to mention the subject that goes back a couple thousand years to early Greeks and earlier, about the subject known as natural law, which is the idea that mankind can use reason as a way to look at the natural order of the world in order to make judgments about what is moral, if that makes any sense. For example, an example of the moral law would be what we find in our Declaration of Independence. Jefferson's take is far from Christian, but it shows up there when he uses words such as nature's creator or nature's law. He's kind of echoing the sentiments of John Locke, and Locke and Jefferson both went back to Cicero more than, say, a Christian view of things. Now, Locke did have some other authors to draw from. But I just want to throw out for discussion this idea of using reason to reach certain conclusions, because I have another question to ask about a famous example of natural law that is now been litigated, and it's actually in the form of past precedents in international law. So I don't know if anyone wants to take that on or discuss the idea of using reason to arrive at conclusions regarding morality and ethics, what is right, what is wrong, and what we ought to do.
I'd say that I have.
Go ahead.
Here, you okay, Jim?
Yeah, I was jumping at the bit, but I didn't want to be the first to respond.
Okay. I have no problem having that conversation. I think the conversations about moral oughts is fascinating. Sometimes the conversation on oughts is a lot more productive than the conversation on ises. Mm-hmm. Just because what is the case versus what ought to be the case makes more sense. This is also why you've got some people who will take current established law and say that something is right because it is in current established law. They'll take the is. And usually when somebody refers to that, I'll just go ahead and point to slavery in the United States and go, well, we have an ought that is certainly different than the is in this case. And I think now we have an is that mirrors the ought. So I do actually enjoy that conversation myself.
Yeah.
I think it's far more functional to ask what is beneficial and functional, what creates progress and what creates a regression. Like also, I mean, if you want, you can also ask what benefits the most or something of that.
When you do get into that conversation, though, you do have to make really certain to be clear. So, for instance, when you say something that benefits, you have to be clear on what agent you're trying to benefit. So, what benefits humanity is most certainly going to be different than what benefits the entirety of, say, all animal population on Earth, as an example. What benefits humanity can be different than what benefits the ecosystem, depending on if we're talking on short-term, long-term. I'd imagine you're talking about what has the most beneficial recourse for humanity, though, correct?
Well, for sure, you would have to, as a human, consider humanity above other.
Well,
things.
not necessarily. I actually have a friend of mine who actively argues. I don't know how we come to agreements on things, but he actively argues against human rights. He doesn't think that human rights are axiomatic in any way, shape, or form. So there are some people who actually don't argue from a state of humanity rights.
Yeah, and Suris, you were talking about the ought versus the is, or getting the ought from the is. I know that can be a challenge for some people, but I think once you can get what we're aiming for, once we agree on what we're aiming for about the flourishing of living beings and kind of the veil of ignorance kind of thing, once we can get to those things, then we can also get kind of a how from an is, which is kind of what Sam Harris talks about.
I actually really like the veil of ignorance when talking about moral conversation. I'm hearing an echo. I think it's Taylor who just came in. That's the username that's on it, at least. But no, I actually really like the veil of ignorance. I've made several appeals to it in my videos before. Because whenever somebody says that, oh, like, for instance, a female should do this because X, and like, okay, well, what if you were born into the world as a female? Would you still be saying the same thing that you're saying right now? Right. And usually they've either got two options, either backtrack from there or put their foot in their mouth. And it's maybe it's the part of me that enjoys a little bit of chaos, that enjoys watching the squirming between the two positions.
You're chaotic neutral.
Chaotic good.
Chaotic good.
My entire thing is minimizing harm. So I do think that's more of a good position. I do play D&D, but I do enjoy the chaotic nature. It's one of the reasons why, like, even one of the videos on my channel is the arguments against God that atheists should stop using, and I got a lot of negative flack for that, because they're just like, no, the argument from the stone is it's a perfect, like, win-all condition. I'm like, no, it's not. Stop, please.
Minimizing harm is kind of subjective. I mean, everyone has their own interpretation of that. For instance, the other host of the show, TJ, he's self-described speciesist. He's a pure humanist. Any other non-human animal is secondary to him. And of course, I'm wildly different. Vegetarian for 6 years, and we've had conversations about just drinking cow's milk. Forget about eating meat, and there's a huge rift there. So minimizing harm, were we talking about specifically humans, or just like you said, like all animals?
Yeah, that goes back to the original clarification that I wanted when the conversation about what is beneficial came up, is that you have to be very clear on what is considered beneficial. For me, I'm a pragmatist, So usually what works best in the moment that does not have severe long-term harm functions, because pragmatism is the philosophy of what's useful, even though it's made up of contradictory philosophies. Which is, I see Mark smiling at that. He knows.
Well, Mark would be, I'm just assuming, maybe coming to it from a different perspective, maybe a divine command theory, which, morality is completely objective and it's not subject to the fluidity over time. Yes,
that would probably be. I think though that you'll find evidence of natural law theory, for example, in some of the Apostle Paul's writings. And as a matter of fact, to further what you just said, yes, because you'll find aspects of natural law theory in agreement with such things as, say, portions of the Ten Commandments, like nobody wants their stuff stolen, don't steal other people's stuff. I mean, that's pretty universal regardless of culture or time and history.
The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Except I have several objections to the golden rule.
Yeah.
Well, it predates also Christianity, for starters.
Well,
but there's someone in the chat who says some BDSM individual may take issue with the Minimize Harm Foundation, but that's a bit
the thing
discriminating, because
the thing is that if you're talking about
consenting adults, and it's then not harm if the person
if you're talking about a fetish, you have to make the differentiation between hurt and harm. Hurt is not harm. It can lead to harm. Like not to get into the TMI conversation, but auto-asphyxiation can go from hurt to harm very quickly. But if we're using the word harm, usually we're talking about like a more grounded, this is a negative thing, not a negative aspect of something used in a positive sense.
Right, but it is in a way it is a point to say, like, who decides what is harmful and what is not, because just like you're talking about, well, yes, humans should be like that. Your friend is kind of speciesist, or that he would consider you speciesist. Is, well, where would humans be without the other species on the planet? Sure. How would we survive without the ecosystem and all those things? Probably not. So you still have to take those things into consideration, but that's just still an opinion.
Yeah. Well, that comes down to a balancing act most of the time. Like, for instance, there are certain things that we will always need animals for up until the time where we don't. Right now, there are several people who cannot have a diet that does not contain meat. I'm friends with one personally who actually can't metabolize plant protein. So he actively has to have meat in his diet. However, with the coming of lab-grown meat, he might soon have an option that does not involve that particular type of animal harm. But there's also certain things that we still need animals for, like certain types of experimentations, because otherwise the best option is humans. There's also certain types of organ harvesting that is required, because there are compatible organs between humans and animals in many cases. I'm trying to remember, there was one person who comes to mind with that. I'll just throw that under the bin. But even then, at that point, you're still harming something for a human sake. But again, it comes down to a balancing act. You don't want to destroy an ecosystem just to basically get a bunch of steaks. But you would want to make sure that people can be fed. So you have to find I would imagine you have to find the balancing act between those two.
Yeah, so this conflict is exactly why in real Christianity, you don't base it on how you fit reasoning or natural law. There's no such thing.
Could you define real Christianity?
Say that again?
Could you define real Christianity? Because that seems to be a very loaded term.
Yeah, real Christianity is what God intended it to be in the first place. That's what our church is designed to restore.
That is a vacuous definition.
Pastor Wilson, can I ask you?
What is your special connection with God that makes you know more than the next Christian?
I think this would get into
Christianity should be designed.
Yeah, this would get into the exegesis argument, actually.
The church has been corrupted over the last 1,800 years because of the Catholic Church and the Roman Empire. So God is actually allowing the true church to be restored on earth now because of the freedom and protection of religion that we now have in America. So God has allowed me to be able to understand and see all the things needed to restore the true church on earth and be able to actually teach people how to do that. So when Mark gives the ideal of natural law or using reason, that's not Christianity. That's just what people, corrupted Christians,
but he specifically appealed to the Pauline doctrines.
No,
he specifically appealed to the Pauline doctrines when making the argument, though. That would make it adaptive to Christianity, would it not?
No, what he did was he put his own reason and logic onto Paul and made it say that that's what Paul was saying, and it's not.
Did not Paul use his own reason and logic when writing the letters that make up the Pauline doctrine?
No.
Pastor Wilson, let me ask you, prior to Moses running down that mountain with the tablets, did humanity know that it was wrong to kill each other or to steal from each other?
Say that again? At that
prior
point,
to Moses running down the hill with, so prior to that, throughout all of human history, prior to the Mount Sinai incident, people just had no idea that it was wrong to kill each other. Societies formed thinking, oh, it's okay to just kill whoever we want.
Well, there's two different segments. From Adam and Eve to the fall, they would have been able to know. From the fall to Moses, to where you're talking about, or to Noah or whatever, to Moses where you're talking about, no, they would not have known until they were told.
Now, see, I would respect.
What is the significance of the story of Cain and Abel if they didn't know that murder was wrong?
They knew the murder was wrong.
It was the whole reason why he had a moral dilemma. Yeah,
the law was given because of transgressions. People knew what it was to do wrong.
So, for instance, when you have the original doctrine with Adam and Eve, why did Adam and Eve hide in the garden when God came looking for them? Because they knew they had done wrong. They had eaten from the tree. Why did Cain utter the phrase, "I am not my brother's keeper," when he was questioned by God? It's because he knew prior to the Ten Commandments coming down, prior to the global flood.
Yeah, you're talking about two different things.
No, I'm not. We're talking about one thing. We're talking about murder and whether or not it's wrong.
What Adam and Eve knew after they ate from the tree.
I use them as a parallel. They're tangential to the argument. Focus on the argument.
Yeah, I'm addressing that. What they knew was their own perspective of right and wrong. They didn't know real right and wrong.
So now we have three perspectives.
God doesn't know real right and wrong based on the Bible because God speaks against murder, yet he also commands his people to murder. So
that's the point. The only thing that's right or wrong is what God says.
I'd like to focus on the fact that we now have three perspectives. So we have four perspectives. I'm sorry, actually, there's four perspectives here.
Appreciate you keeping score.
Yeah, Christianity is complicated. That's why you needed to be explained.
Yeah, I actually talk about exegesis and hermeneutics on my channel. I'm decently good at explaining some of this stuff. And I'm an atheist.
Life is very complex in and of itself.
It's not real Christianity. It's your own version of it. It's not real Christianity.
We have a comment real quick, guys. Sorry. Mr. Boot says humans are always prone to kill each other. The more someone is hungry, the more he's at risk of committing a crime. Hunger could have many meaning as well.
Well, all crimes are built on consumption for the most part.
It's basic hierarchy of needs there.
Yeah,
they'll kill for it.
Yeah, when you get low enough onto Maslow's hierarchy, you kind of fall into things. Pretty much as you move up the hierarchy of needs, when you've got all of your base ones, we see several people fall into types of deprivation whenever they're starved of whatever is next on the hierarchy that is necessary for them to climb higher. People who have all of their base needs, water, shelter, food, when they start missing out on the needs that are higher up on the hierarchy, like companionship, we start to see desperation form from there. So no, I agree with you 100%, Mark. That's a good point.
Sorry, Mark, I cut you off. What were you saying?
You're fine. My question was just for the pastor. I'd like to know the background of his church. Are you in any way affiliated with Latter-day Saints by any chance?
No, like I just said, every other church over the last 1,800 years has been corrupted. So there haven't been any real Christianity or any real churches or any real Christians over the last 1,800 years because it wasn't possible. So I wouldn't be associated with the Latter-day Saints because they were created less than a couple hundred years ago. So that wouldn't fit with what I'm saying.
And just my last question. won't harp. I just wondered how did you arrive at the conclusion, or where did you learn about that Christianity needed restoration? And then I'll stop for the subject. So.
Well, yeah, that's basic in itself. The Bible shows you that the church is one unit. It didn't become divided until after Paul and the people of the first church were actually killed by the Roman Empire, which started with Emperor Nero and the Great Fire. Once that persecution started, all the real Christians were gone. So the only people that were left were corrupted people that would read the Bible and basically guess. Then those corrupted people started the Catholic Church. Then the Catholic Church forced everyone to believe their way or be persecuted or killed. So then you got countless years of people being forced false doctrines. And from that point on, Christianity just splintered into thousands and thousands of different denominations.
Can I ask a
so
question?
Real Christianity hasn't existed since then.
Can I ask a question? How is it that you have come to the conclusion that only after 200 years or however many years, whenever there was the persecution by the Catholics, is where before that point there were the true Christians? Because all throughout the biblical history, there were points in times where believers were persecuting other believers. Just look at the Pharisees, for example. That's another time. So before Jesus died in the Bible, and before the New Testament was there, similar things occurred. So how come you choose the point in time where you do, where there's a split in sects of Christianity, and not a previous time or a later time?
Yeah, well, the reason why God waited until now is, like I said, because of the freedom and protection of religion here in America. So that's the main reason why he had to wait till now to be able to actually implement the true church. Because if he did it prior to that, it would have just been pushed out.
No, I
like
mean, how that's
church.
not my question. My question is, how do you choose the persecution by the Catholic Church as the point in time where there was a divide between the true Christians and the not true Christians, and not an earlier point in time or a later point in time? Because very similar things to that, as far as persecution is concerned, by people and characters that are in the Bible. It happens all throughout the Bible.
The timeline goes continuing. So the Pharisees happen. Jesus is there. He fixes it. He creates the first church. The first church is there. They get persecuted by Nero. They die. The Roman church happens. And that's where we are now.
So
I'm going throughout history. I don't understand. The Pharisee part was already explained in the Bible.
There is somebody who doesn't understand. I do have a question, and then I'll let you go, Courtney. I'm sorry for interjecting here. I just had to write this down, otherwise I was going to even forget about it. So you brought up a point, and I'm fairly certain, I'm not 100% certain, but I'm fairly certain Mark might actually agree with me on this point. You just limited your God's power. You just limited
God's
all of your
power
God.
is limited.
Well, you just limited the power of the person who was able to create the entire universe. You limited their power so small. I don't care if it's limited. It can be limited. Fine, cool.
I'm agreeing with you. I did limit his power.
Okay, but you understand that's a form of blasphemy now, so you get to go to hell, right?
No, it's not a form of blasphemy. You just don't understand.
That is a form of blasphemy. You just took God's name and his image, and you just misrepresented it. That is a form of blasphemy.
So if you're wait. If you're an atheist, would you actually know what God's real form and image was?
I'm fairly certain you don't, and I'm fairly certain I don't.
No, answer the question. Would you know?
If you listen to the last 3 words of my statement, if you actually used your ears that God gave you, then you would have heard my answer to that.
For you.
So, okay, here's the thing. If you limited your God's power so small that a creator deity that can create everything in the universe is now limited to the legislation of one country formed 200 years ago, you are limiting the deity who existed not even being a word that can work with him because he's infinite. You've limited the power and their scope to a legislation in the United States over the past 200 years. You've made your deity so small that he's got the age of 2 men combined, and that's it.
Okay, so if it wasn't limited, then how did the Crusades happen?
That is a complete non sequitur. Both those two things together doesn't make any sense.
Okay, if it wasn't limited, why did Paul die? Why did Peter die? Why did countless people of the church be killed?
God's
That's a
will
very
and not
good,
infringing
actually,
on free
no,
will.
that's a good question. But then my question really would be because no, you're saying that you have been given some supernatural ability to perceive God, and that if someone is an atheist, they wouldn't be given this supernatural ability. But you're also saying that there's only a limited amount of people who consider themselves Christians to be able to have this special ability to understand or see God. And you're also, okay, I'm just doing a recap of everything that I get from the Pastor William, is it?
It's Wilson, is fine.
Wilson, Pastor Wilson. And you're also saying that there is no reason. So if a true Christian doesn't use reason to come to their conclusions, and I'm just thinking to myself, God, if God is real and God is a creator and he created us, then he created beings that are like their best quality as far as, qualities and species on the planet go, is that they can reason and think and process thoughts and create themselves because of this. So if we're also considered to be created in his image or their image, then they would have to be beings that were reasonable or able to reason as well. So this is quite baffling to me that you would say that as from the get-go, if you are a true Christian, then you do not use reason, or you should not use reason.
Yeah,
Does
so
that
first,
make sense?
the Bible says that you have to be born again to understand the things of God. So it is limited information for special people. 2, the Bible tells you that few people are going to make it. So again, it's telling you in the Bible that few people are actually going to understand it. Number 3, the number one thing that God told us not to do was not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's your reason. Your reasoning is what he wanted you not to do. All he wanted you to do was to listen to him. And for Cyrus, the only reason why you're stuck is because you're trying to fit your old Christianity into what Christianity actually is. And everything you've learned about Christianity is wrong.
So let me ask a question, because the way that you've spun the narrative, and I am using that term deliberately. The way that you've spun the narrative, you have, and Mark being the Christian in here, if he agrees with me, that would be neat. If not, then I'd like to know where I'm in error here. That would be good. So the way that you spun this narrative, not only did you limit your God's power, which you already agreed to, that's fine, but you've also undermined Jesus Christ's entire message, because Jesus Christ had a message of salvation and forgiveness so that the human race, from the point that he sacrificed himself, could actually be washed in the blood of forgiveness. If that is the case, then you have created a worldview where for 1800 years after he had that sacrifice, he was unable to actually save anybody, which was his goal. You've created a deity who not only is bound by the powers of the American legislative system, but this deity not only is bound by that, but had his plans undermined after he successfully completed them for almost 2 millennia.
Yeah, so again, you don't actually understand what you're saying.
Could you demonstrate that I don't understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, what
you can
Jesus,
assert that.
He doesn't really
Okay.
understand what you're saying.
What Jesus,
perhaps.
Well, he
what Jesus
walked into this saying that we shouldn't use reason, and he's demonstrating
when
that quite well.
When Jesus died on the cross, he gave us all the opportunity to salvation. The only way that real people get access to salvation is through the church. That's why he created a church.
No. Jesus.
Where does it say that?
It never says that in the Bible. Jesus says that access to salvation is through him. He sits at the right hand of the throne.
And the church is how you get to him.
The church is allegorical to Jesus.
No,
Jesus
that's why he says, upon this rock, I will build my church. That's why they started actual churches, because the church was actually needed.
They taught actual churches because the Pharisees were in power at that time, and them were ancient Hebrew culture. You had zealots, Essenes, Pharisees, Sadducees. Essenes typically were the Galileans. Your zealots were the people who you really didn't want to mess with. Your Sadducees were your vocal tradition bound ones, and your Pharisees were your scholars. Your scholars were in power at the time when Christianity was introduced. Therefore, your scholars teaching in churches, which is also how we got the standard academic system, your scholars teaching in churches is the method that was used from thenceforth, because Pharisees were the ones who controlled most of the state in Judea at that time. That's a matter of history.
You're confusing things.
I'm not confusing things. I just gave you the matter of history.
You're talking about.
I just gave you the four tribal groups of Judea.
You're talking about temples. You're confusing temples with churches.
I have a question. I have a question for Pastor Willis.
He's confusing temples with churches. They're not the same thing.
I have a question, and my if it's okay for me to ask this, is to what extent are you not allowed to use reason? Because for basically just to do, besides just like normal, everyday like shit, you really do have to use reason. You have to use reason to cross the street. I'm sorry, I think I already cursed. I don't know for 18 minutes in yet.
So it's all right. Jim's going to be monetized.
No, so the point of it is that your reasoning cannot be your end all be all. I'm not saying that you can't use reasoning at all, but if your reasoning is your end all be all, you will never end up at real Christianity, because countless people will come up with different reasoning.
Well, reason is not. It shouldn't be an end all be all for anyone. It's just a tool.
Yeah. So what I'm telling you is that you can't rely on natural. You can't rely on natural law alone. You can't rely on reasoning alone. Christianity is based on what God says alone. That's it. Okay. Reasoning doesn't matter.
I don't
reasoning doesn't matter. Your natural law doesn't matter.
Well, you need to rely. You have to rely on reason to be able to do anything besides sit inside and lock yourself in as a hermit. But even then, you would have to rely on some form of reason.
Percentage-wise, you rely 10% on reasoning, 90% on God. That's it.
If I can butt in real quick, I got two quick things. First, our guest of honor is conspicuously silent. I want to hear more of his ideas. Second, another comment from the live chat. The real answer in Christianity, as we know it today, appeared 300 years after Jesus with the establishment of the Trinity. Before that, he was considered a Messiah and not the Son of God by his followers.
Okay, that's as I understand it, from what I've been able to research, the first of the church fathers, or what would be considered the disciples of Jesus's apostles, was Tertullian. Around the year 170 AD was the first to use the word Trinity in reference to Father, Son, Holy Spirit. One of the things that I bring up in the intro to philosophy class that I teach is how, by the time 300 years later, when the doctrines of the Trinity were settled at the councils, specifically Nicaea, you had the early church utilized the tools of classical Greek philosophy in order to establish how three persons can make up one God in light of the Shema in Deuteronomy 6:4, where God says he is one. And so I am aware of the challenge to the fact of Jesus being Messiah closer to his life. for those of you who will agree that there was a historical Jesus. And then the discussion comes, well, where does that leave the councils later? So I would hold to a more conservative view that based on what I have read in the New Testament, specifically in the backgrounds that draw from the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, that there are phrases and imagery where the New Testament writers portrayed Jesus as using the words or having the attributes of Yahweh. And so it's kind of a deeper study, but I'm not going to fight somebody. We're not going to come to fisticuffs if someone doesn't hold that view. I'm just going to say that from my biblical studies, it leans to me that they were convinced that there was something about him, that he was more than just human. And so that's probably why we're still debating that to this day. So I don't know if that made any sense, Jim, or if that's what you were looking for.
I know for a fact there's one definite reference to the Trinity, and I will give you a second one. I've heard, what's his name? I can't remember his actual name. He goes by General Han Solo, and
Robert.
he's going to hate me.
Robert.
Yeah, okay. So he gave me a list of 26 references to the Trinity. Some, of course, are very nebulous, but I'll give two. And I think does anyone, well, Mark or Pastor Wilson, do you think that because they're widely known to be interpolations, to be apocrypha, I mean, not apocrypha, but pseudepigraphical? Okay, so maybe they were later interpolations. Was it part of the original doctrine?
I'm going to say yes. Now, I'm aware that a lot of the verses in the New Testament, a couple of them, I believe it's in 1 John 5, where the biggest question is 1 John 5:9, I believe, that portrays Father, Son, and Spirit, and the discussion is that may have been a scribal addition. I think in Matthew's Gospel at Jesus' baptism, you have all three present. I was in a conversation with some Mormons one time who were convinced that Jesus and Jehovah are not in any way related. They are two persons, but they're not the same God. And I had asked them about Isaiah 42:1, which is a reference to the Father speaking, or Jehovah speaking to his beloved, the Messiah, but they're obviously two different persons. So Jesus can't be Jehovah in the Old Testament. That's typically a Mormon claim. But I know I'm tracking with what you're asking. Just how much of an emphasis in the New Testament texts is there for a firm foundation of Trinity? We would probably be in more agreement than disagreement on some of those verses. I agree that some of the people draw some things out that are a little nebulous at best. I am convinced that it was the disciples of the apostles, the church fathers, that really took those things and ran with them on the basis of what they perceived to be heresies. So I think that the doctrine grew out of a knee-jerk reaction to people taking Christianity and running with it because they perceived themselves as having the correct view of Christianity.
I know we're off on a little tangent here, and that's okay. We're kind of known for that. But just to tie up the loose ends on the morality issue, this is a thought experiment that I've offered before, and I've been accused of, well, that's not really a thought experiment. The way I define it, the way I lay it out in my thought experiment, I've been accused of it not even being an issue of morality anymore. But if we have a conversation about morality, absolute versus subjective, but we limit it to not saying the following 6 words: right, wrong, good, evil, should, and ought. Yeah. If we limit those 6 words out of the conversation, is it still, well, first, is it still a conversation on morality?
No.
Not really.
Yeah.
No,
Well, you have the concept
Well.
of justice and mercy still.
well, it's still it's more about what is and what
More
should
honest
be.
portrayal. It's a more honest portrayal of what then most people would view as some kind of separate from natural rule that we should abide by to live. And there can be rules that we live by because they help us or our interests as humans to flourish and succeed as a collective, and that is not at all discounted as, you know, awesome if it is not dictated from above or is not some type of universal holy thing, if that makes sense.
It does. I would follow what you've said, Jim, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this would be the last portion of my opening question. And this is one of my favorite things to discuss, actually. If you look at the Nuremberg trials, and you have United States, France, Russia, and Great Britain coming into Germany to judge Germans for their behaviors, war crimes, and whatnot in the Second World War. And so the issue for Justice Robert Jackson, who was the American Supreme Court Associate Justice who went over to help create the London Charter and then go in. So the question before them was judging the behavior of the Germans, where it was legal to kill, Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and intelligentsia and rebellious members of the clergy and all the other groups of people that were identified as undesirable.
Basically, kill all the cool kids.
So here's the problem. They come in. By what authority do these outside nations have on German soil to bring about a guilty verdict, and what can they appeal to? And Justice Jackson, to make long story short, he appealed to the idea of natural law, that there is value within humanity. That's where we get the phrase crimes against humanity. And he decided that there was something intrinsic just from the nature of being human that was violated. Whatever humanity is, that's more of an essence in philosophy. It's not like you can go to your local grocery store and pick up a pound of humanity, so to speak. So
it depends on if you go to some voodoo cultures, you might be able to.
Besides this, it's based purely on the natural law tradition, and they were able to obtain convictions and put people to death based on violating this idea that there's something inherently valuable among all people, and whatever the Germans violated, they violated it. And so that's what I wanted to raise up, because one aspect of studying natural law is it frees up anyone who's a magistrate or a judge. They do not have to come under the thumb of any religious or clerical notions if we're all in agreement on aspects of how we ought to behave toward, there's that word ought, aspects of behavior within societies and between cultures. So I'm just throwing that out there for any thoughts, if anyone wants to build or reject or whatever you might think.
I think
that doesn't apply, because if they had one, they would be deciding what the natural law was. It doesn't apply to everyone.
Well, there you go. That's kind of proof of my theory, that being that morality is something which is decided by whatever the culture around you is, and a personal view of morality is a combination of that and your environment and your upbringing and your hormonal or psychological wiring. It can be affected even by whether or not you are male or female, and can be affected even by your race, probably. And there's so many deciding factors to why people believe what the difference is, what would be best to do and what would not be. And it's going to be really, and it is proven, you can just look all over the world and see different regions and different places and how differently they deal with right and wrong, these ideas of right and wrong. Because if you go to some Islamic country, things that we would find abhorring and appalling over here they would think things we do over here are abhorring, abhorrent and appalling. So then it's really there. Yeah, it's very dependent on the external factors and the time that you live in. If we lived in medieval times, right or wrong would be a very different thing as well.
Yeah. See, she's being honest. You're just spending more time trying to show that you're smarter than everybody else. You're not giving real answers and even thinking everything out.
I'm fairly certain.
I mean, I apologize. I'm not like, I don't usually use like philosophical terminology. I don't know all of the terms for every viewpoint and everything. This is just for me quite straight through information. There's no way you can say that you're, the time that you're in or the culture that you were born in is not decisive for your view on morality.
But fair.
No,
I don't know if
it's
limited. I don't know if it's limited to a
it's not
temporal.
limited
to time frame, because objectively it could be defined as all those actions which increase well-being while simultaneously decreasing suffering. And I think, and I could be wrong, it's totally debatable, I think, because you can't have one without the other, because if you increase all well-being, that could cause suffering somewhere else. So it has to be increasing well-being while simultaneously decreasing suffering. If that can be achieved, and I think this is the debatable part, is I think we could scientifically come to an agreement. I think it could be scientifically, objectively measured, total well-being versus decrease in total suffering. We can nail that down scientifically. And therefore, objective morality is unnecessary.
Yeah, except for the fact that well-being itself and suffering are highly subjective.
Exactly.
So
they're
very scientifically measured.
Can it though?
I think it might be. I don't know how, but I think that's a possibility. Go ahead.
I don't think it can, because for something to be scientifically measured, you'd have to appeal to the scientific method, and one of those things is going to be replicatability. And I don't know how you would. I don't know how you would employ replicatability into your measurements there.
Oh, go ahead.
No, there's a bunch of scientific things that you can't replicate that you guys hold on to.
You can pseudoscience measure suffering and well-being through psychiatry and psychology, but that's not
that's not a hard science. I'm talking like a machine, like some, I don't know, maybe not yet invented machine that could measure our suffering against our well-being. I just think that might be a possibility.
Except then you have, that's the thing, is that you have people that experience suffering in completely opposite ways.
Different ways.
Like the guy at the beginning of the stream in the chat had said, there's some people who you would measure as far as their endorphins or whatnot are concerned, or the activity in their brain, and they would be experiencing visible enjoyment from what another group or category of people would not. So I don't think there's really, plus the fact that, like, if you ask maybe some certain sects of, for example, even Catholicism or Judaism, where they do self-custiding, I think it's called in English, like where they slap themselves with
self-flagellation.
Right. So those but that's for them. It's a form of enlightenment, and therefore it's no longer suffering. In a sense.
Not to mention, you can have synaptic misfirings as well.
Yeah, my concern, Jim, is I think we're veering very close to the is-ought distinction when we make comments about. It's more of a philosophical comment to say that empiricism can be used to determine moral facts, and I think that's just my perspective on that.
Yeah, I do. Now that Fair said that she made a really good point, and I think I just changed my mind. I don't know where I stand on that.
I think so. Like, I'm caught between two areas. So on one hand, I want to agree with Jim. Even though I disagreed with him during my statement, I want to agree with Jim because I want to live in a world where we can measure these things finitely, because I like having answers that are clean cut. But I think that the issue of having a clean cut answer is in fact the problem when dealing with issues in morality, and why you can't measure things like well-being with a finite tool, because that would mean a clear-cut answer to something that by its very fundamental nature does not have clear-cut answers. It's why we've been having the conversation for multiple millennia.
And it's a tool. Morality is a tool by the higher powers. I'm not talking about spiritual powers, but more like political powers and leadership to steer people to do things in a certain way, just as religion is. And
yeah, here's my dilemma. If I were to build this machine, I would have to plug in some prior coding to say, hey, machine, it is better to be alive than dead. It is better to be not in pain than in pain. And those are presuppositions on my behalf.
Yeah.
And
that raises a great question, Jim, when it comes to self-driving cars. If you have these autonomous vehicles and something goes wrong, should the car, it's about to hit a pedestrian, should the car avoid the pedestrian when such an action would kill the driver?
You'd have to put in trolley problems into the car.
Exactly. And there was a study done recently in Europe, and it depended on the country, depended how conservative. And now you're attempting to build in some sort of altruistic behavior into. So a great point you brought up there. Yeah, there's
but you can be but if you have a machine like this, you could incorporate that there are people who are masochistic or things like that. Therefore, that could be incorporated into the measurement itself. But I think it's really way more complex than that, because we just have entire structures and systems that are completely contradictory to each other, spread out over the world. So like if you were to reduce the maximum amount of suffering in all people all over the planet, you would have to just induce peace on Earth, basically, right?
There's even another issue that gets brought up there. So when Jim said that you'd have to plug in the presubs, one of the other issues you'd have with this machine is, let's take an issue like the death penalty, capital punishment. So we have a machine now that has to measure whether or not it is better to keep a prisoner alive for an indefinite amount of time in order to achieve this maximum peace that was mentioned just before.
Yeah. But if I plugged in the precept that being alive is better than being dead, I know what the answer the output would be.
Well,
yeah, he would say keep him in jail for life.
But consider this:
execute him.
He's a murderer, so he has a proclivity. He might have a proclivity, rather, to murder somebody in prison. So now you have to weigh that chance up against that as well.
Son.
It complicates the problem further.
But you also, it's not you. It couldn't even be. It's better to be. Yeah, it's better to be alive than dead. Would be one of many factors, because you would have to consider. I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. I mean, people.
It's going to crunch. To be dead than suffering.
Yes, but suffering is something that happens in your mind.
But the machine's going to crunch the numbers and determine the probabilistic, the likelihood of him committing a murder in prison.
I'm going to let you know what this machine's going to do.
Reducing physical suffering is not the reducing suffering, and usually the worst suffering is mental or emotional suffering of humans, and that's what causes physical suffering
it's
in
the
end.
pain
And
that doesn't go away.
I'm not talking about like diseases, even that's not even yet on the table. Now we're talking about actions that cause suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And those are mostly,
I've got a bunch of
jail have some type of psychiatric issue too.
I got a bunch of questions in the live chat, but before I get to that, I got to address the 400-pound gorilla in the room. There's 2 people in this chat that think that all this is really a moot point because they've got an instruction book. And I just want to know if that instruction book that comes from something bigger than us, has it ever been wrong? Is it subject to change? Does it need to get revised? Is there anything in there that we don't follow anymore? And I'm not talking about eating shellfish in Leviticus. I'm talking about the big stuff. Is there anything, not dispensations, or I'm talking about the rules that we're supposed to live by in this instruction book? Is it due for a revision? Is it inerrant?
Well, the answer is no. It's fine the way it is. You just need the people to show you what it actually says.
No, if you're talking about the Bible is an agent for suffering in the world, as are other quote holy books.
Yeah, I disagree with that completely, but all right.
Well, I mean, if you did, why do you disagree?
Because if you use it the right way, it doesn't bring suffering. If
now you need to define the right way. Sure. Now you need to define the right way.
Yeah, I've done that already. You just want to go down the same rabbit hole.
We're not going down a rabbit hole.
I
imagine, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine if I donated $100 a month to your church, then you would show me, correct?
No, I will tell you the same thing that I just told you. The right way is we have to teach you how to actually follow Christ the right way. Yes. I could explain it all to you completely free right now, but if you weren't going to listen, it wouldn't change. The answer doesn't change.
My ears have been open.
If you don't like it, it's the answer.
So
it sounds like you've been projecting a lot.
The entire time that the Bible has existed, nobody except you and the people following your church. Can I ask you how many people are in your church?
Well, no, the people that were part of the first church actually understood it. That's why I said those people knew how to do it the right way.
So everybody, but except the people in your church and the first Christians, which didn't call themselves Christians, I don't think, but
no, I don't think so either. Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody else has done it wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
There's 41,000 different sub-denominations of Christianity, and Pastor Wilson, you're saying that. Now, I just want to know what let me ask you this. Could you be wrong?
Which one's more likely? For there to be one God that has 41,000 different denominations of himself, or for those people to just have it wrong?
But you dismiss.
You just dodged
39,999 of those.
A God, or they're not.
No, that was my question. Which one is more likely?
You dismiss 40.
You actually just dodged it, though.
No, I didn't dodge it. He knows my answer.
Yes, you did.
My answer is yeah. Of course, we're the only true church. That was obvious. So I countered.
Is it possible that you could be wrong? That's simple, and it's not, I'm not leading you into a trap. I just want it because is it possible that I'm wrong? Is it possible that Yahweh is the? Yeah, it's totally possible. So I'm asking you: is it possible that you could be wrong?
No,
that you and your viewpoints and your church
No.
Could be wrong.
It is impossible for you to be wrong. Could you demonstrate how that is the case?
Well, that's
Again,
proven.
I've done it over and over again when I'm explaining the
prove a
Bible
negative.
to you, but you keep brushing it aside, so it doesn't matter.
It's really strange to me how many times you've used terms like brushing it aside or not listening when you've demonstrated that the only reason you're able to use those is because you're able to do them so well.
I've been pleasantly pleased that we've been getting along so well, and I want to keep it that way. Nudge,
So
nudge.
what did I explain the church was when I was explaining it to you and you brushed it aside? Go
I
ahead.
didn't brush it aside. You gave me a vacuous point.
What was
Okay.
what was the church that I explained? Go ahead.
Can we play a guessing game? Since I've never met you before and I've never seen you in a stream before, I'm gonna guess for you your question that you're asking him that you have already answered towards him, but I've never heard you answer. And it's gonna be something like this. The church is the body of Christ with many parts, and Jesus is the head, and all of us are the hands and the feet and the fingers and the legs and the body, and we are the body. And the church are servants and followers of Jesus. Do I get anywhere close?
Well, yeah, none of that has anything to do with the explanation to him, but yeah, all that's true. Yeah.
Right. So then that's what most every single Christian church applies in as a fundament of their church.
Well, that's not true. Most people think that everybody is a part of the body of Christ, and it doesn't matter what denomination that you're a part of. As long as you believe in Jesus Christ, you're fine. What the Bible's actually telling you is that there's actually one church, one denomination that you're supposed to be a part of, and then go from there. It's not telling you that you can do whatever you want.
What does John 3:16 say?
There's no there are because they talk about, you know, the different religious groups and things like that of that time, but the original Christians, like you said, they didn't call themselves Christians. Therefore, there was no denomination. So
no, I use the term denomination for you guys' understanding. I agree with you.
Oh. Well, I mean, but you shouldn't adjust your expression of what it is that you believe based on what, I mean, if I don't understand, just for me personally, if I don't really understand where you're coming from, for sure I would ask you. And I know that's like, I don't like to go under a bunch of assumptions about somebody. I mean, because what made you come to the position that you have today on the matters of true Christianity?
Yeah, God allowed me to go on a 13-year journey talking to people from all different denominations, all different walks of life. And I realized the only thing different from every single person is that they're just using their own souls to figure out what the Bible means. So they're using their own life experiences, their own past, their own family, and so on and so forth. And that's why you have so many different denominations, is because so many different people have different experiences. So if you apply your experiences to the Bible and 1,000 other people apply their experiences to the Bible, you're going to get 1,000 different versions of the Bible. So then God allowed me to learn all those things and actually showed me how to show people what the Bible actually means versus what they've been taught by corrupted Christianity.
Okay, but what she's asking you though, and correct me if I'm wrong, how can you demonstrate that yours is correct over the others when every single one of them makes the exact same claim that God showed them X, therefore Y? You're making the claim that God showed you X, therefore Y. And I'm willing, there's a part of me that is willing to engage in hypotheticals. I'm willing to grant that you might be right. I'm willing to grant that. However, if I grant it, then you would have to grant a demonstration as to why you are right.
So then
how is your Christianity different from Mark's here?
You know them by their fruit. So you know them by their fruit, meaning their teaching and the doctrine lines up with what the Bible says and how the world actually works. So the way that the world actually works.
Let me butt in. I'm sorry.
Their fruit. Fruit is basically that which, because we have this allegory in the Bible of seeds being planted. trees growing or plants, bushes growing, and then the fruit that comes from that. So the fruit is actually the result of your planted seed. What you're speaking of then would be doctrine. Doctrine would be the planted seed. Fruit would be what comes of the planted seed. That's it's an allegory. It's like a
Yeah, that was the second part that I said.
Guys,
I
I
said
got to
when you
butt
see it in
in.
real life.
I
Go
got to
ahead.
butt in. We've been neglecting the live chat for a while. So this one's for Mark. It's a comment, and I'm going to make it into a question. It is not possible for Moses to have been telling the truth about Yahweh while at the same time using Sumerian and Babylonian stories to tell his tale. Not possible. And I think the question behind that is, do you think maybe any of the Mosaic or all of the Mosaic doctrines can be predated, and maybe he was just parroting them?
That is an excellent question. If you study ancient Near Eastern documents, I may go out on a limb and suggest that he is actually rebutting those documents without getting into age of the earth scenarios or trying to force science onto the earliest of the chapters of Genesis, just to give you an example. If you look at the Mesopotamian god, Marduk, usually portrayed as a snake man that walks. And who do we see in the Garden of Eden? And the reason I bring that up is not because I'm some far-flung, out on a limb type person that studies in academia. I'm suggesting that because I think modern accounts or understanding, we're trying to read modern understanding back into what legitimately can be called a Bronze Age document that may have no intention of teaching us science. And I just say that because a lot of you brought up earlier the issues with the adamant young earth creationists. That doesn't resolve with what we see of the natural order. You have old earth creationists who don't hold to evolution. That doesn't hold up in certain passages. You have Christians studying evolutionary science, trying to unite those sort of things. There's difficulties with that. I'm going to set aside a purely evolutionary view. That's because that runs up rabbit trails for me anyway, and I don't want to step on anyone's toes in that respect. I have questions from within science and philosophy about some aspects of evolutionary thought. I just have concerns as someone who's read the Bible several times that I just wonder if people who mean perfectly well and have good intentions are trying to force ideas on those early Mosaic texts that those texts were never written to support, if that makes any sense.
Does that speak to the Bible's inerrancy? Then I have to ask that.
I would hold to some form of inerrancy. I mean, I'll be straight up with you guys. That's just I think there are more problems for me, more problems caused when you step away from inerrancy. Because then it becomes the question of, well, if it's not inerrant, what parts are false or flawed, and who gets to decide that? So there we go into more denominations, more issues, more fracturing. So to me, even from a theological view, if God can't lie and God's going to tell us the truth, and the Bible is his inspired word, which he gave verbally to men to write, then is he going to lie to us? Because if he lies, then that is not an attribute of an all great being. And so I have difficulties with the idea of the Bible not being inerrant. That's where I fall.
Can there be a virtuous lie?
Can we make that another show?
That would get into an entirely other show, and I'd love to have that conversation with you.
Not according to the Bible, though, there wouldn't be, because it's one of the 10 Commandments.
Well, remember that.
Like why? Well, basically, couldn't you just view the 10 Commandments as something that is it a matter of interpretation? This is just because couldn't it be that he was just writing down basically what he saw as functional ways of living and saying, since these things are functionable ways of living, therefore they are holy, rather than saying this is holy and it tells me it's a functional way of living, if that makes sense. How do we even know?
That leads back to the original natural law question. There are, because if you look at other ancient cultures around the world, personal property, the right to personal property is present in virtually all of them. The aspect of that it is wrong to hurt or injure or kill another human is virtually present in all of them. And now all cultures are going to have different ideas of worship and who their God is, that sort of thing that you'll find. But when it comes to man's relations with mankind, don't go messing around with someone else's wife. That's common in other cultures. It's good to speak the truth. They're fairly common among other cultures. If you look at their proverbs from around the world, yes, I see that. Proverbs from around the world. And the question,
I was thinking the same thing, Suris.
the question came up.
We need Richard Carrier in here.
There you go.
You've already got me, though.
The question came up, about virtuous lies, but sometimes you see that sort of activity in the Old Testament when Rahab hid the spies and then lied.
Yeah, or what about when the daughter laid with the father and sneaky got him drunk thing?
Lot.
Yeah.
Oh, the story of Lot.
The Old Testament is sort of, the more I read it, the more I've come to appreciate that it is a collection of books that are as broad as they are long. And I have concerns because we brought up, Skeptic shows morality. Jesus, his second commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. I think that's something to both aspire to, and it's a virtue to work.
What if your neighbor is a psychopath?
Well,
there are at least a dozen religions that had the golden rule before Christianity, though.
True, but that's not. I don't think that's an issue for Christianity.
That would be a natural law tenet, though, and Jesus' idea of do unto others is present, as within virtually all cultures, and so and his is a bit more proactive than some of the others. And I appreciate you guys bringing this up. So.
When Jesus, and I'm not this is the atheist saying this, I'm not a huge fan when the point is brought up that the golden rule existed in X other cultures, because Jesus never made the claim in the Bible that he was the first to instigate the golden rule. He just said that it was the most important.
Okay, fair enough.
Didn't he say first, though, that the most important was love the Lord your God?
Yes. Love the Lord and love your neighbor.
Right. So it's also, and this is used, and there's one discussion that has to do with like what is questionable about the morality of the Bible. But then there's a whole nother discussion to be had about what the church does with the Bible. Mm-hmm. So basically there are a few verses in the Bible that have a huge effect on Christian cultures, and that have a huge adverse effect on society itself because of the way that people come out of that church if they are raised in that church. One of them being that it says, I did not come to reconcile. I came to turn brother against brother and father against son. And where basically there is this idea that your connect with your environment and your connect with your loved ones, that you naturally would want to take care of and would prefer over the next, is meant to be basically stricken from your activities. So if someone is not doing what you feel God wants them to, or if someone is not supporting your method of Christianity, then it is okay to basically throw them out on the street. And that's why gay kids become homeless, and why people remove themselves from their families. And this has an adverse effect on society, and therefore is questionable in its morality.
It doesn't sound very loving.
That also bridges really well into the exegesis conversation, I think, doesn't it? Because there actually is a whole conversation about, like, when you're talking about things like Leviticus, you brought up the gay people being thrown out in the streets as an example, because there are tenets in Leviticus that seem to say horrible things about homosexuals. I could be wrong, but I believe that when you look at the original Hebrew, some of the words that are used seem to mirror something closer to pedastry instead of homosexuality. When you get into Romans, it's definitely about homosexuality. But I think some of the Older Testament stuff is a little more loosely defined. I think. I could be wrong.
Part of that also deals with... I'm sorry, Pastor, go ahead.
No, I wanted to see if I can address why God tells you to be disconnected from your family, or you guys want to just move on from there? Because he does tell you to be disconnected from your family, but the reason for that is because every person is born corrupt, and while you're born corrupt, Satan is in control of your life. So the reason why he tells you to be disconnected from your family, and that only your spiritual family is your real family, is because Satan is going to use the people around you to continue to pull you in the wrong direction. Because
like
I disagree. I disagree with that. That idea that we are born corrupt.
The Bible would disagree with you.
Philosophically speaking, I would tend to lean towards believing that we are born as we are, which is neither corrupt or good. And that our life, I guess one purpose in life is to become the best version of that person that we were born as, with that exact makeup that we started out with. So, so no, we're not born corrupt. That's terrible. That's a terrible thing to project onto.
The Bible disagrees with
a terrible thing to project. Right, exactly. And what I'm saying is that that is and has an adverse effect on society, as a very actually not something from just your church, but many churches have this attitude that people in general are just shit, basically, and I don't agree with that. And it's something, when you ingrain that into a child, that's a terrible thing to do.
Sorry, I was out of the loop for a second, but Fair brought up something about maybe 3 minutes ago that I found interesting, and to dovetail onto it, the 10 most important prescriptions in the Bible, the first 4 are just God talking about how badass he is, but he never says anything about don't own another human or don't have sex with someone against their will.
Yeah.
So Mark or Pastor Wilson, I mean,
yeah,
I know it's an argument from silence and it's probably a fallacy, but where's the objection there?
Yeah, the 10 Commandments weren't designed to be morality. All the 10 Commandments were designed to be were just a set of rules designed to stop them from destroying themselves until Jesus came.
That's the definition of objective morality. It's morality with an objective standard.
No, that's not what I mean. That's not what God intended. That's not what God intended. You're trying to get smart out.
Whatever
that's not
it
what
is,
God
like
intended for it to be.
Right, so like 800 years between the 10 Commandments and Jesus. So in those 800 years or whatever it was, right, that time they needed this guidance. Just hold out for 800 years, and then after that you can ask for forgiveness and not have to worry about it anymore. You don't hear how strange that is.
You made a major leap. Well, no, the reason why he did that,
a lot of those.
Hey, Suris,
mankind was already
live chat. Jungle Jargon's in the live chat now. All right, go ahead, Pastor.
Oh boy, my favorite.
Yeah, mankind was already corrupt once they ate from the tree. So they were already born in sin, and they were already dead, and they were already damned to hell from that point on. So from the point of the disconnection to the time of Jesus, they were already damned regardless. It was just playing throughout the time. The Ten Commandments were only designed to hold the children of Israel together until Jesus came. That's it.
All right, but the family and the your tribalism and your connect with your environment, and something that is very lacking in society right now is a connect to your fellow human being, whether they are Christian or not. And it starts with your connect to your parents, your connect to your brothers, your connect to your family, and then it goes to your connect with your children. And that is exactly what causes us to quote do good. And so it doesn't make any sense then for
would you want your son deeply connected with someone that was evil and was going to lead them in the wrong direction?
No, but I would want.
That's exactly God's point.
No, but but I would want my son to feel deeply connected to me, so that he would be looking to me for guidance.
Oh, but God sees you as that evil. In this analogy, God sees you as that evil person going to lead him into the wrong direction. And that's why he doesn't want you connected by him.
It doesn't make sense at all, because you're saying that the fundament of a healthy society is what God rejects as the functional pathway to this thing. So it doesn't it's a total
the people that aren't following God, he doesn't believe they're a part of a functioning society. He doesn't believe that they're capable of creating a functioning society.
Right. Yet here why doesn't he just zap them?
Because he's a just God. He's giving you the opportunity to turn from that.
Is he a just God, or is he a merciful God?
He's both.
Is he maximally just and maximally merciful?
Depends on what your definition is.
The definition of justice and mercy are pretty much axiomatic. So here's the issue that I have. Is your God all just? Would you say he's 100% just and 100% merciful?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, here we go.
We have an issue here. We have an issue where we have a God who has things that are, by their very definition, on two sides of a coin. Justice is the suspension of mercy. Mercy is the suspension of justice. You've created a God now that is sitting himself in a neat little logical paradox.
You've created a married bachelor.
God can do that.
God can be a married bachelor.
So you accept that the argument from the stone defeats your God then?
I've never heard the argument from the stone.
And yet, oh wow. It's like the baby atheist's first worst argument.
A stone so heavy that he could not lift it.
Yeah, that was philosophy 101 for me.
Yep.
Yeah, it is one of the oldest, and there's people who think that it's like a gotcha, that it's a bird in the hand type of deal, and it's not, but it is like one of the first things that you use as a logical problem. To accept that a God can square a circle, which is what you've just done by having a 100% just, 100% merciful God, you've created a deity who is suspended in the problem of the stone. The answer to the problem of the stone has always been to create a God who is logically omnipotent, who can do all that is logically possible. To do things that are not logically possible binds him in the problem of the stone to create a logical paradox where that God cannot exist. So by accepting that you can create a married bachelor with your God, you've doomed him into non-existence while also limiting his power, which you did earlier, to a 200-year American legislation.
Okay, so why are there Christians today being killed?
Why are there Muslims today being killed?
In countries where
why
they
are there
don't
Buddhists
have,
today being killed?
in countries where
Why
they
are
don't
there
have
Hindus
freedom of
today being
religion,
killed?
why are they being killed?
Why are there atheists today
Because
being killed?
there's no
The problem is that I can
freedom of
insert
religion in
anybody.
countries.
I
Yeah,
can
you don't have
include
a
Drew
God.
into
You
here.
don't have a God that's almighty.
Pastor Wilson, I live in a state that does not allow me to run for office. In their state constitution, I have to accept a higher power to run for office. There's 13 states in the union that will not technically allow me to run for office. We're all being persecuted, brother.
That's my point.
That's not your point. It actually is. It's a counterpoint to your point by saying it proves you don't understand the point.
You just broke down the limitations that you're limited to based on the law.
Right.
The reason why God waited until now is because those limitations don't exist for Christians anymore.
Well, then why couldn't God impose his own limitations?
I feel like what he's saying is that God is limited by the choices of humans within his mercy by giving us free will.
I would like to put a bow on this and table it for maybe a later discussion. I'm going to give Mark the last word, and we're going to go ahead and try to wrap this up. Mark, is there anything you'd like to say at the end?
Well, I do appreciate everyone's conversation. I enjoy this sort of thing. I enjoy hearing other perspectives. I think we've behaved ourselves well, and I think to remain monetized. At least I haven't said anything to take that away. But
I may have demonetized Jen. Sorry.
There you go. There you go. But
Stick a finger in my ass.
Well,
no, we're after 17 minutes. I don't care.
That's a bit much, Jim. That's TMI. I mean, if it gets you off, that's fine. But like, I don't need to hear about it.
All right. Go ahead. Sorry.
So I appreciate everybody. You know, I imagine most all of us here want just about the same things. You know, we'd like to be left alone by our government. We'd like to live our lives in peace. We'd like to not get taxed too much, or if we do get taxed, we'd like to know where the money goes. We'd like to have elected officials that would actually put the people first as opposed to themselves. And there's all sorts of things. I think we have more common ground than a lot of people admit to. I don't think we have to break into tribes all the time about stuff. And I think I do appreciate the questions coming out about the nature of God and that sort of thing. I look forward to coming back sometime and discussing issues. Now, to me, it's a category error, the whole creating a stone that he can't lift it. But you know, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you guys. Appreciate what you do. I hope you have me back, and I just look forward to it. So,
Fair, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, I would really like to discuss these matters more. This is really nice. Thank you for inviting me. I feel like it's a very tricky conversation that has a lot of gray areas, and there's a lot where I feel like this conversation, as far as the morality discussion is concerned, has only just scratched the surface of what there is to discuss on the matter. But yeah, it's been interesting conversation.
All right. Pastor Wilson, anything you'd like to add?
No, yeah, these discussions are fun. I mean, I speak to thousands of people a day, but these conversations are on another level. Like, most atheists aren't saying the things that you guys are saying. You think it's common, but it's not. So that's why I like to hear it and see what you guys are saying.
We do not claim to be common. and we're trying to build some bridges and find some common ground and most importantly, have some fun. Suris, you got anything?
I'd say I really enjoyed the conversation. I didn't really tackle it so much from an atheist perspective until the very end, and I noticed that in the conversation on the live chat, there were a few people that were like, "Suris, did you switch sides?" No, it's not that I switched sides. It's that I actively have to study both sides, or I don't have a channel. I think it's the only honest way to go about things. So I've enjoyed the conversation, even if I've been speaking from the side that I don't technically represent for most of it.
Awesome. In the description section of this video, you're not going to see anything right now, but when it goes off live and becomes pre-recorded, everything, all the plugs that my guests put up front are going to be in that description section. So look for it there. And thank you all for watching.